Hello, welcome back to George Past the Post. I wanted to talk in this video about the historic fragmentation that we are seeing in British politics, at least if current polling is to be believed, and why this particular moment is quite unique in the certainly recent British political history. We have had realignments before, where sort of one two-party system has been replaced by another two-party system. So I'm talking principally of the transition between when the two-party system was Conservative and Liberal to when it was Conservative and Labour. And there was a period in between where you had some elections where it was a genuine three-way fight between the Conservatives, Liberals and Labour, and other elections where you sort of had blocks running, blocks of parties or alliances of parties. So in 1918 you had Lloyd George, who was a Liberal, running effectively in coalition with Conservatives. And the same happened in 1931 with Ramsay MacDonald, where you had, again, you had different parties running in sort of coalition with each other. So my point being this: there's always been a sort of, with a few exceptions of those perhaps elections in the mid-1920s, we've always had, mainly due to first past the post, a two-party or two-block system. Now, there have been challenges to the current, well, I can't really call it current, to the Conservative-Labour two-party system. The main challenge was in the 1980s when the SDP Liberal Alliance, who in terms of vote share in 1983 nearly got close to Labour, but not in terms of seats. And before the 1983 election, at one point, the SDP Liberals were actually ahead of both Labour and the Conservatives. But the moment passed, and then in 1987 and 1992, even though Labour didn't win those elections, they cemented themselves again as the main alternative to the Conservative Party. Now, there was also a period in 2019, around the time of the 2019 European elections, when Theresa May was struggling to get her Brexit deal through. There was a brief moment where the Brexit Party and the Liberal Democrats were first and second. Now, not just in the European elections, but when they asked people, how would you vote in the Westminster election? Now, again, that moment passed. The Conservatives elected Boris Johnson as leader, and he was able to consolidate the Leave vote in 2019, and at least in terms of Westminster election, Labour recovered in that they were the second party in 2019. And even in 2024, while there was a record low vote for both Labour and the Conservatives combined, in terms of seats, those two parties still dominate Parliament. But since that election, we have seen not just the rise of Reform in the polls, but more recently, the rise of the Greens, which is the biggest threat to the Conservative Labour Party two-party system that I think we have ever seen. Now, of course, we won't be able to confirm whether that two-party system is gone until we actually get the results in 2029. But if not just present polling, but if parliamentary by-election results are to be believed, and of course we'll know a lot more when we get to the local elections in May. So why am I doing this video now? I know, but anyway, I just fancy doing it. So why not? So what is unique, I think, about this moment is we're obviously seeing reduced support for Labour and the Conservatives and increased support for Reform and the Greens. At the moment, we're not seeing, yet at least, a clear new two-party system emerging. So we're not seeing a huge number of, put it this way, we're not seeing Reform and the Greens both polling at 40%, for example, or, the mid-30s. We've still got Reform around 30% roughly, up and down a bit. The Greens are 20%, something like that. It all fluctuates. So at the moment, voters are not doing what first past the post is meant to do, which is meant to make people coalesce around two parties or two blocks. And what's unique is at the current moment, while the Conservative Labour two-party system may be declining, we're not yet sure what might replace it. And what you might expect under first past the post is, even if one two-party system declines, another one will quickly replace it. And we're not seeing that at the moment. And we're not seeing that partly because, well, people are just fragmented anyway, but also the current politics would get in the way. So what I mean by this is, so we're not seeing the Greens and Reform surge to the point where they are definitely, where the new two-party system would be the Greens and Reform. We're also not seeing any attempt, at least not yet, of the creation of two sort of blocks. So even if, the parties may not be strong enough on their own, we're not seeing any attempt to form alliances or coalitions. So, for example, I'm not saying this would necessarily happen, but I'm just to make the point. He said, droning on after 6 minutes. So we're not seeing Labour, the Greens, and the Lib Dems teaming up to say we will form a left of centre, progressive, liberal, whatever we want to call it, group. And we're not seeing the Conservatives and Reform saying, well, we'll form a centre-right, right-wing group. So the result, what we're left with, is people are just, it's a situation where literally any party can get around 20% of the vote. And so we're not seeing, first past the post is not producing that two-party system that is meant to result in people coalescing. Wow, I've been going on for a while. Why this is happening? Well, obviously the current political situation, but I think as well, the breakdown of first past the post, as in, for many years, I think the reason that Reform and the Greens have grown so quickly is, yes, the political situation, but also, I think there's always been a block of voters that were always to the right of the Conservatives and always to the left of Labour. But for decades, those voters have been told, or they had convinced themselves, well, if you're on the left, you have to vote Labour because they're the only people who can stop the Tories. And if you're on the right, if you're to the right of the Conservatives, well, we are, we may as well vote, we have to vote Conservative to stop Labour. But now, the magic spell, that spell has sort of broken. So the Conservatives proved in 2024 they can't beat Labour. And if current polling is to be believed, Labour, well, they can't beat the Conservatives because Conservatives are gone or disappearing. Labour may not necessarily be able to beat Reform. So what people are now doing is they're saying, well, I may as well just vote for a party that I've always wanted to vote for anyway, but couldn't in the past or didn't feel I could. Now, for many decades, that was because there was no, in many elections from 45 to the 70s, there were only two candidates on the ballot, so you can only vote Conservative or Labour. And then even in the 70s, when the Liberals contested lots of seats, if you were to the right of the Conservative Party, you may not want to vote for the Liberals. Or if you were to the left of the Labour Party, you may not want to vote for the Liberals. And if you're in Scotland or Wales, you may want to, sorry, Northern Ireland, it's too complicated, but I'm not going to go there. Scotland and Wales, you may not have wanted to vote for a nationalist party if you didn't believe in Scottish or Welsh independence. And then even when UKIP, for example, and the Greens did start to stand everywhere and say, 2010 and certainly 2015, there was limited in how many votes they got. And even 2024, there would still have been people who perhaps didn't like the Conservatives, but still voted for them. Remember, the Conservatives still came second in terms of votes. And given how close the election was in many seats, that may matter. People who felt, well, I might want to vote for Reform, but this is the seat I'm in, I'm going to vote Conservative to stop the Labour Party. And what we're potentially seeing is, first past the post is not doing what it is intended to do, and the voters are not behaving as you would expect them to, and the politicians actually are not reacting in the way that you might expect them to. So they're not creating a new two-party system. And as I say, everything I've said in this video may be, what's the phrase? Maybe invalidated by upcoming events. But I just thought, while I've got some time over Easter, I would ramble on at you about where we are. So where we are is in a very fragmented situation. The voting intention reads more like how people would vote if we had a proportional system. And how that translates into first past the post is any guess. And the next video I'm going to do is going to look at what the outcomes might be at the next election if it's a hung parliament, which you can look forward to that. And so we are living in a very interesting time. We'll see what happens in the local elections. So yes, an historic fragmentation, which is not yet resulting in a new two-party system emerging. And at the same time, they're not changing from past the post yet either. So we're in a very unique position, which for an election systems lover like myself is perfect. Anyway, happy Easter, goodbye.